The wind never stops in the mountains of northern Iraq. It moves through the mouth of a cave called Shanidar the way it has for tens of thousands of years. And in 1957, it moved across the exposed bones of a man who should not have existed. He was old. That alone was strange enough for the time period. But it was the rest of him that stopped archaeologists cold. His right arm ended just above the elbow, amputated so long before death that the bone had smoothed over. One eye socket showed damage consistent with blindness, likely from a blow to the skull. His joints were swollen and fused with arthritis so advanced that every step, every reach, every night lying on cold stone ground must have been agony. He could not hunt. He could barely walk. In the story we've all been told about ancient life, a man like this dies fast, dies young, dies alone. Instead, he lived for years, maybe decades, and that single broken skeleton is about to unravel everything you think you know about why ancient humans never grew old. Picture him for a moment, not as a specimen, but as a person. Imagine waking each morning to pain that never fully leaves. Imagine depending on hands that are not your own to bring you food, to help you stand, to guide you around the fire when your eyes can no longer find the light. Imagine knowing every single day that you contribute nothing that a hunter-gatherer band should need, and still being fed anyway. Someone chose that. Not once. For years. You've heard the popular version of prehistoric life. Nasty, brutish, short. Cavemen dying at 25, worn out by 30, ancient by 40. It's repeated so often it feels like settled fact. But archaeologists will tell you something quieter and far stranger. That number was never really a lie. It was a trick of arithmetic, and it hid one of the most human stories in our entire history. Here is where the mystery begins to crack open. When researchers calculate average life expectancy for an ancient population, they take every death in the record and divide. And in the ancient world, a horrifying number of those deaths happened almost immediately. In many prehistoric societies, close to half of all children never lived to see adulthood. Add those deaths to the people who lived into their 60s and 70s, and the math produces something meaningless, an average age of death hovering around 30, even though almost nobody, statistically, actually died at 30. It's not that ancient people didn't grow old. It's that half of them never got the chance to try, and the other half quietly disappeared into a number that made them invisible. But that was not the strangest part, because once you strip infant mortality out of the picture, a completely different world appears. Survive your first 5 years. Survive childhood illness and the accidents and the hunger. Survive into your 20s, and your odds of reaching real old age were far, far better than almost anyone assumes. Something even stranger is baked into human biology itself, and it points at exactly this pattern. Anthropologists studying the Hadza, a hunter-gatherer people in Tanzania, have spent years documenting something odd. Human women, uniquely among nearly all primates, live decades past the point where they can have children. In most species, that shouldn't happen. Evolution rarely keeps something around that can't reproduce. Unless it's useful in another way. Researchers call it the grandmother hypothesis, and the idea is this. A woman who lived into old age didn't stop contributing to her family's survival. She gathered food. She carried children on long marches so mothers could rest. She held the accumulated memory of which berries were poison, which storms were coming, which sicknesses could be treated and which could not. Families with a living grandmother had more children who survived. Old age, some researchers now argue, wasn't an accident of human evolution. It may have been one of the reasons we evolved at all. Then the mystery deepened again, and it circled back to that man in the cave. Shanidar I, that's what researchers call him now, a name assigned to a person whose real name vanished 40,000 years ago, could not have survived his injuries through luck alone. Someone had to carry food to him. Someone had to help him stand when his joints locked with pain. Someone had to watch over him through cold nights in a world with no medicine, no safety net, nothing but the will of the people around him. This was not a hospital, not a village with surplus food to spare. This was a small Neanderthal band, moving through mountains, hunting to survive, where every extra person who couldn't contribute meant less for everyone else. And they kept him anyway. For years, historians used to imagine Neanderthals as barely surviving brutes, one step from extinction, incapable of anything beyond raw survival instinct. Shanidar I quietly demolished that image the moment his bones were cleaned of dirt. He is not even alone in this. Other Neanderthal remains, found in different caves on different continents, show similarly catastrophic injuries that had healed, meaning the person lived long enough afterward to need sustained care from others who had no obligation to give it. Wait, it gets stranger still, because this pattern of survival against impossible odds isn't confined to Neanderthals, and it isn't confined to Shanidar Cave. High in the Ötztal Alps in 1991, 2 hikers found a body preserved in ice for over 5,000 years. Researchers named him Ötzi, and what his frozen body revealed shocked the scientists studying him. He wasn't young. Analysis placed him in his mid-40s, an age that, according to the old myth of the doomed caveman, he should never have reached. His arteries were already hardening. His joints ached with arthritis. And scattered across his body were healed wounds from injuries sustained years before his death, proof that he had been hurt badly before and had lived on afterward, climbing these same brutal mountains for years more. Somebody, somewhere, patched him up once too. And he kept going. So if old age wasn't rare, why does the image of the short-lived caveman refuse to die? Part of the answer is almost mechanical. Elderly bones are more fragile than young ones, more likely to shatter, scatter, or vanish before burial. For decades, this quietly skewed the fossil record itself, making ancient populations look younger to the very scientists digging them up, simply because the oldest members were the hardest to find intact. But there's a second reason, and it's less comfortable. We want our ancestors to have been more fragile than we are. It flatters the present. It turns modern medicine, modern comfort, modern life into a triumph over a savage past. A Neanderthal who broke his body, lost his sight, lost his arm, and was still fed, sheltered, and kept alive by people who owed him nothing, complicates that story in a way we don't always want to sit with. It suggests that compassion is not a modern invention. It suggests it might be one of the oldest things we are. Centuries later, in the Roman Empire, we finally have something rarer than bones: written records, census documents, tombstone inscriptions carved by grieving families. And they tell a strikingly similar story. Infancy remained ruthless. Roman infant mortality was brutal by any modern standard. But adults who survived into their 20s routinely lived into their 60s and 70s. Roman writers described elderly senators still shaping politics, aging philosophers still teaching, grandmothers running entire households full of children and grandchildren. Old age in Rome wasn't a miracle. It was simply what happened to the people strong enough, or lucky enough, to make it past the years that actually killed everyone else. Which brings the whole mystery to its real answer, and it isn't the one the title seems to promise. Ancient humans didn't fail to grow old. We failed, for over a century of modern science, to notice that so many of them did. The real story was never a species that died young. It was a species where infancy and early childhood were a gauntlet almost nobody escaped unscathed, and where the ones who did escape were, again and again, protected, fed, and kept alive by the people around them, long after they stopped being useful in any practical sense. That single fact should change how you look at aging entirely, including your own. We still, somehow, keep making the same mistake Shanidar I's discoverers almost made. We look at the elderly and see burden before we see value. We build nursing homes and call it a modern invention, when really it's just the newest shape of something Neanderthals were already doing in freezing caves 40,000 years before writing existed. We forget that the instinct to carry someone who can no longer walk, to feed someone who can no longer hunt, to remember someone's stories long after their hands have stopped being useful, that instinct is not new. It is quite possibly one of the oldest threads connecting you to every human who has ever lived. So picture the cave one final time. A man with one eye, a man with one arm, a man whose body, by every rule of survival, should have failed him decades before it did. Someone stayed. Someone fed him through winters that could have easily killed them both. Someone let him grow old, slowly, painfully, and completely on purpose. 40,000 years later, his bones are still answering the question his discovery seemed to raise. Ancient humans didn't fail to grow old. We simply forgot until his bones reminded us that growing old was never really about surviving alone. It was always about who chose to stay.